Hey, this is Jack, and this video is how to double your political IQ. So let's get straight into this. I'm going to give you my big fat claim right off the bat, and I want to see if you can stay with me long enough, because this idea changed my political reality and I think intelligence, and I think it can do the exact same thing for you. So my big fat claim is your life will be better and you'll have more political intelligence when you stop thinking that social and political truth belongs either only to the left or only to the right. You will have access to a better understanding and sense making of what is actually happening if you can open yourself up to multiple perspectives, including those on the left and including those on the right. Otherwise, it's a little bit like you're listening to an orchestra, but you can only hear certain frequencies. So you're hearing the brass and you're hearing the percussion, but you never hear the wind instruments and you never hear the strings. You can actually make more sense of what's going on, have more access to reality, have more access to your own peace and compassion with what is happening in the world when you start to open yourself up across the political spectrum. You may always have a set of taste buds that more easily, I'm switching metaphors here from orchestras to taste. You may have taste buds that can always more easily taste certain tastes, right? You might have a sweet tooth, and in the same way, it might be easier for you to value perspectives from the left that are about social justice, that are about equality, that are about eco-sensitivity. But you might also learn that there is a place for salty tastes, and that some other people more easily taste and value those salty tastes, and that actually there's nothing wrong with that. Said differently, you can learn to be less judgmentally politically and therefore open yourself up, I think, to better ideas, more ideas, and getting the value out of a greater set of ideas by relaxing your judgment on people who have a different set of taste buds from you, or, to go back to our orchestra, from people who play a different set of instruments than you. Aristotle apparently talked about the power of being able to entertain an idea without agreeing with it, right? Actually being able to hear it. For most of us, and this would be certainly true of me historically, as someone who grew up in left-leaning environments and culture and lived for a long time only in progressive cities, it was hard for me to even hear or value an idea from the right. And what changed me was actually just a conversation with a friend that made me realize that there are valuable perspectives on the right, and I could hear it from him, even though he wasn't someone who's, he's really more center left than on the right. I could hear it from him because I already had a friendship with him, so I couldn't just dismiss him. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to where the chat is about those people, right? Those terrible people. And that might be leftists talking about people on the right. It might be rightists talking about people on the left. And one of the difficulties with this is that often we're not even in contact with the other side. We're talking about an amorphous other that we just describe the most typically extreme views to, the views that we least like and least understand. What happens when you get in real life is you have to realize there's a complex person in front of you, and they might actually agree with you on some things. You might disagree with them on others, and there's other things you really dislike than that comes out of their mouth. But now you're in contact with a 3D full textured human being. You can learn from someone when you don't dismiss them, right? This is this sort of maxim that everyone has something to teach you. So even if you find yourself squarely on the right and you generally hate ideas that have to do with more communal forms of ownership, you generally don't like ideas that put more power in the hands of the state, you don't like more redistributive tax systems, fill in the blank of other ideas you don't like, the tendency is going to be for you to shut down and dismiss people and stay comfortable in your belief system. When we're comfortable, typically we're not learning, right? Learning often involves risk and extending ourselves into places that are not comfortable, into the unknown, right? That's, in my experiences working as a transformational coach for well over a decade, the most profound learning is normally when people are coming out of their comfort zone into their learning zone, right? Not that zone where they're panicked, but that zone of, I don't even know exactly who I am here, right? Or if you think about trying to improve yourself in a sport, often you have to do a maneuver that initially it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel right, until after practice and practice and practice, you start to integrate it into your bodily way of being, into a movement that you can do. The same thing can happen for you politically. You can start to depolarize within, that's the fancy phrase, but you can start to relax your antibodies to ideas that aren't the ones that you tend to value, or aren't the ones that you grew up with, or aren't the ones that you surround yourself with, and actually start to get curious. Why does this person think that? What would you have to value in order to think that? What is right about this perspective? This is like the sort of ultimate ninja move to get into what we call taking multiple perspectives, that I happen to believe, and it's not just me, it's in the developmental literature, is a facet of higher development, is the ability to take multiple perspectives, to see things from multiple perspectives, to step into someone's shoes, to step into more than one person's shoes. That actually makes you a better, broader person. It gives you more leadership capabilities. It gives you more ability to connect with different people. And when you can connect with more people, it gives you more access to information and ideas. And it also just gives you more connection. You don't have to walk around in the world within a perspective that says half of this country is crazy and dumb. That's not a nice way to think about half the people in the world. And even more than that, it shuts you down. It actually makes you dumber because you're not able to connect with what other people are seeing and valuing. And it tends to have you withdraw from people, right? So you're now stuck in a fixed perspective, those crazy leftists, right? Or those racist right-wingers. When actually life is more complex than that. And most people have a set of lived experiences that take them into the perspectives that they're in. And you have a set of experiences that have taken you into perspectives that you're in. I remember being really surprised when I was talking to someone who's pretty hardcore Republican, and found out that part of their origin story was that they used to be kind of lefty, and they came from this really lefty, hippie-ish family. And that family had the tendency to take in people, like homeless people, and offer them board and shelter. And then one day, one of those people took advantage of them and stole a whole load of their stuff. And this was like a traumatic event for this young person growing up, thinking it's really good that we take these people in, and then suddenly they betray your trust. And so from that point, he had a much harder perspective on not being taken advantage of, right? And one of the challenges that people don't like to admit on the left is that some of their ideas around creating a fairer society also open up to free riders and people taking advantage. And if you really don't want that to happen, you might not want to open yourself up to that way of being. You probably have a political origin story. Right? I sort of often say, do you have your political ideas, or your politics, your political ideas have you? Right? It's not like most of us took 5 years off, traveled the world, read all the books, got the best ideas, looked at comparative political systems, studied political philosophy, and then eventually came up with a robust sort of political way of thinking about reality. Right? Most of the time, we're influenced by our tribe, by our upbringing, by significant people in our lives, families, parents, our community, our schooling. We know, for instance, that going to university has an impact on the way that people's politics are, right? You can see these kind of graduate versus non-graduate cleavages. Certainly in the UK, you can see it with the Brexit vote. You can see it recently with this movement towards reform. One of the great predictors of that is whether people have a university education, a college degree. And I'm not making that right or wrong. I'm just saying that's a thing, right? So might it be useful for someone who's been to university to notice that has shifted their way of thinking, and to actually have more space and more contact with people that haven't had that route through life, and how that's maybe informed their way of thinking? I think that makes you a happier, open, more connected human being. I also think it makes you politically smarter because you're not just constrained to one box. I was listening earlier to the news, right? And apparently the Manchester City boss, after I think 10 years at the helm of Manchester City, taking them to something like 20 trophies, he's stepping down. And part of what they were saying was that he proved that there was a way of playing football that people said wasn't possible in the British game, right? In the English game. Which has this sort of tradition, certainly going back to like the 80s and 90s, of being like a long ball game, big center forwards, as contrasted to the continental game that was much more fluid and pass, etc. So I don't know all the details of his exact strategy at Man City, but I think the point they were making was that he's had people playing out from the defense. He's had people playing a style of skillful football that maybe wasn't supposed to be possible. in the English game. And this is now one of the most, if not the most successful manager of modern times. So why am I telling you that? Because you might become more successfully politically, right? Meaning you can metabolize value across the political spectrum and not just be doubled down on a narrow set of ideas. You might be able to make that possible in your own life, but you're going to have to challenge some presuppositions that you might not know you hold. You might not know that you've approached politics from a sort of a self-aggrandizing perspective, a kind of a, I've got this right, other people have got it wrong. It's actually more useful in some ways to start from the alternative premise that maybe some people have some stuff right that you've overlooked. That's going to increase your learning, right? If you're walking around within a confined, contracted, sort of self-congratulatory, I've got it right perspective. And by the way, I'm actually not judging that as much as I'm judging myself, because I think in an unconscious way, that's what I had in the past. I think I thought that the left had it right in politics. That's what I'd been socialized into, and that people on the right were narrow-minded, self-serving, small-minded, and sort of out for themselves, right? Without looking at the fullness of what it can be to be in a perspective on the right that can be to do with many things, right? Including conserving, right? Conservatism, conserving what is good in your society, conserving the achievements of previous generations. Being cautious and risk averse when it comes to trying to evolve things, realizing that sometimes you could make it worse before you make it better, and that history is littered with people who thought they were doing something great and actually seem to end up murdering millions of people, right, on the extreme end, or just that sometimes when you go to make something better, you actually destroy something precious in the process, or maybe you can't make it better. Having the humility to notice that something might have served a group, a community, a country, a world for generations. So who's to say that your newfangled idea is actually going to take it any place better? Observing on the right that you need order in order to have safety, and sometimes in order to make progress. And that if you take away the structures of order in society, as many anarchists would want, you may actually have a devolution and not an evolution, right? Have you ever been in a place where the police have lost control and seen what it unleashes in a crowd of people, right? Looting, violence, etc. Now, there's much more nuance and contour to the things that I'm throwing out here. I'm just giving you the possibility that there are certain vectors of reality and sensitivities that people have that it's good that they're actually more sensitive to, right? And just in the same way that in an orchestra, some sounds are fine and some sounds are gross, some people in society are much more sensitive to certain frequencies. And in the same way that, for instance, you could do, I'm mixing metaphors again here, you could do a SWOT analysis if you're in business, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Some of us are more in contact more easily with opportunities, right? Often, I've been an entrepreneur, often entrepreneurs see opportunities. They see sort of the upside in something that they can do. Other people are more risk averse. They might say, hey, that's an interesting idea, but have you thought about X, Y, Z, right? And they're much more in contact with what could go wrong, or the unforeseen problem, or kind of troubleshooting things before they happen. In the same way, some people are just more geared to threats than they are to opportunities. As a society, I believe we benefit from having people that are more sensitive to threats and having some people that are more sensitive to opportunities. We actually, if we can work out a way of being together, I think we're stronger, right? If you're all opportunity and no threat, you might just get blindsided by something. You might run out of money. If you're all threats and no opportunities, you're probably not growing, expanding, and kind of pushing what's possible. We need each other. That's the irony that sits under this, right? That people on the left and people on the right can fight each other tooth and nail all day long without realizing that in some fundamental way, is it just possible, just maybe, that they need each other, that they kind of create each other, that in that competition, in that marketplace of ideas, in that tension, in that polarity to be managed, if you will, that the right and the left need each other. We need an energy of evolution and progress, and we need an energy of conservation and order, and that those things possibly, even in the natural world, they kind of go together. So that's what I'm putting down. I'm curious if you're picking it up. I welcome your pushback. I'm curious about your political journey, and I'm curious if you could run a thought experiment to take someone who you tend to disagree with, or take the side of the political spectrum you tend to disagree with, and be in this practice. What is right about this? What, if anything, could just maybe potentially be right about this? Even if it's just a little bit right, or even if it's just a little bit less wrong. I believe that's going to grow you, and that's a great thought experiment to run. So let me know how you go. I read all the comments. Big love. This is Jack. Thank you.